My name is Jessica Anderson, and I'm 34 years old. Standing alone in my beautiful, empty restaurant on opening night was never part of my dream. Years of sacrifice, countless sleepless nights, and every penny I had went into this moment. I'd sent invitations to my entire family weeks ago, reserved their special table, and yet as the clock struck 7, not a single family member walked through that door. What should have been my breaking point became my greatest turning point instead. Before I share how my culinary dreams both crashed and soared higher than I ever imagined, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to find strength when the people who should support you most just didn't show up. Growing up in Millfield, Ohio, population 3,462, meant limited options for most kids. But for me, our small kitchen became an entire universe of possibilities. Every Saturday morning while other kids watched cartoons, I stood beside my grandmother, Nora, on a step stool watching magic happen at her fingertips. Cooking isn't just about feeding people, Jessie, she'd say, her hands moving with practiced precision. It's about making memories they carry with them long after the plates are empty. I was only 8 when she first let me make pancakes completely by myself. The pride I felt when my family ate my slightly misshapen creations was intoxicating. Well, most of the family, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. My mother gave a tight smile and said, "That's nice, dear, but don't make such a mess next time." While Grandma Nora saw a budding chef, my parents saw cooking as something practical, necessary, certainly not a career path. My father, Robert, was an accountant who believed in stable professions and retirement plans. My mother, Patricia, taught second grade and valued education above all else. Neither understood why I'd rather experiment with recipes than join the math club. "It's just a hobby, Jessica," my mother would say whenever I mentioned cooking school. "You need something practical to fall back on." By high school, I'd managed to get a job at Darlene's Diner, the only place in town serving anything beyond standard American fare. My parents hated it, arguing that waiting tables was cutting into my study time. "You should be focusing on college applications, not serving coffee to truckers," my father would lecture. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just waiting tables. The owner, Darlene Harper, had noticed how I'd linger in the kitchen, watching the short order cook with fascination. After 3 months, she started letting me prep ingredients. By senior year, I was creating weekend specials that actually brought in customers from neighboring towns. "You've got a gift, honey," Darlene told me one night as we closed up. "Don't let anybody tell you different." But at home, my culinary achievements were met with indifference. When I excitedly told them about customers requesting my special bourbon-glazed meatloaf, my father just asked about my calculus grade. My older brother Ryan, already in pre-law at Ohio State, would roll his eyes. "Great, you can make meatloaf. That'll really change the world." My younger sister Megan, though only 14, had already internalized our parents' values. "It's kind of embarrassing that you work at a diner," she said once. Chelsea's sister got accepted to Princeton. Despite Darlene's encouragement and my growing confidence in the kitchen, I ultimately caved to family pressure. I applied to business schools instead of culinary programs, telling myself I could always cook on the side. When I got accepted to the University of Cincinnati with a partial scholarship, my parents were ecstatic. "Now you're on the right track," my father said, actually hugging me, a rare occurrence. What they didn't know was that I'd specifically chosen Cincinnati because it had a respected culinary program. While officially majoring in business administration, I secretly spent my elective credits and savings on weekend cooking classes. I justified it as understanding the restaurant business from all angles if anyone asked. College became an exhausting balancing act. Weekdays were filled with marketing strategies and accounting principles that made my eyes glaze over. Weekends came alive with knife skills and sauce techniques that made my heart race. I lived 2 completely separate lives, the dutiful daughter pursuing a real career and the passionate chef in training seizing every opportunity to learn. During family visits, I'd field questions about business internships while hiding calluses from kitchen knives and burns from hot pans. My grandmother was my only confidant, listening to my excited phone calls about mastering the perfect croissant or creating a signature pasta dish. "Follow your heart, Jessica," she'd say. "Life's too short for anything else." But every time I considered coming clean to my parents, I remembered the disappointment in their eyes when I'd prioritize anything over what they considered success. The rare moments of their approval had become like a drug I couldn't quit chasing, even as it pulled me further away from my true self. By senior year, the double life had taken its toll. I graduated with a business degree and a secret culinary education, neither one receiving my full attention or passion. As I walked across the stage accepting my diploma, my parents beaming with pride, I felt like an imposter, successful on paper but increasingly hollow inside. That night, as we celebrated at an expensive restaurant my parents had chosen, I watched the expediter calling orders in the partially visible kitchen. Even from a distance, I could feel the energy, the purpose that flowed through that space. And I knew, despite years of trying to convince myself otherwise, that my place was in a kitchen. Not in some corporate office staring at spreadsheets. But as my family toasted to my bright future in business, I smiled and raised my glass, still lacking the courage to disappoint them. The fluorescent lights of the marketing firm buzzed overhead like angry wasps. My cubicle, one of 50 identical gray squares, felt smaller each day. 3 years had passed since graduation, and I'd done everything right. I'd secured a position at a respected Cincinnati marketing agency. I had benefits, a 401k, and the external trappings of success that my parents could proudly mention to their friends. But I was dying inside. Each morning, I'd force myself out of bed at 5:30, not for my job that started at 9 o'clock, but to have 2 precious hours experimenting with recipes in my tiny apartment kitchen. Those moments, with flour dusting my business attire and the aroma of fresh pastries filling the space, were the only times I felt truly alive. My apartment was barely 600 square feet, with a kitchen smaller than most people's bathrooms. But I'd invested in good knives and a few essential tools, foregoing furniture and other comforts. My living room contained only a futon and stacks of cookbooks. My savings account grew steadily, not for vacations or a house down payment, but for a dream that still seemed impossibly distant. Nights and weekends became a blur of recipe development and business plan drafting. While former classmates posted photos of exotic vacations and engagement rings, I was calculating food costs and researching restaurant failure rates. The statistics were terrifying: over 60% of restaurants failed within the first year. But rather than discouraging me, these facts made me more determined to be prepared. My social life dwindled to nearly nothing. Dating became a series of short-lived relationships that inevitably ended when partners realized they would always come second to my dream. "I never see you," complained Michael, my boyfriend of 8 months. "And when I do, you're either exhausted from work or talking about restaurants." "This is important to me," I said, chopping vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. "It's who I am." "It's an obsession," he countered. "And honestly, Jess, it's probably never going to happen. Do you know how much money it takes to open a restaurant? How many fail?" His words stung precisely because they echoed my own fears, as well as my family's practical concerns. 2 weeks later, we broke up. I cried for one evening, then channeled my energy into perfecting my signature dish, a maple-brined pork chop with apple fennel slaw that would eventually become my restaurant's most requested item. Small catering jobs began to fill my weekends. A colleague's birthday party led to a baby shower, which led to a small wedding reception. I cooked in clients' homes or delivered prepared foods, building a portfolio and clientele through word of mouth. Every dollar earned went into my restaurant fund. After 5 years at the marketing firm, I had been promoted twice and was making a salary my parents deemed respectable. I also had developed an ulcer, chronic insomnia, and a profound sense of living someone else's life. Something had to give. The decision came after a particularly soul-crushing week of creating marketing materials for a fast food chain's processed chicken product. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 2 hours, calculating and recalculating my savings. I was still far short of what a restaurant would cost, but I couldn't continue the charade any longer. The next morning, I handed in my resignation. My parents' reaction was predictably catastrophic. My father, normally stoic, actually shouted over the phone. "You're throwing away a perfectly good career for what? To cook? People cook at home after their real jobs, Jessica." My mother took a different approach, her voice dripping with disappointment. "We sacrificed so much for your education. How could you be so selfish?" My sister Megan, now finishing law school, texted simply, "Mom's crying." Way to go. Only my brother Ryan offered any support, tepid though it was. "It's your life to screw up," he said. "Just don't come asking for money when this fails." With my marketing career behind me, I secured a job as a line cook at Harvest Table, one of Cincinnati's upscale farm-to-table restaurants. The pay was less than half my corporate salary, but for the first time I felt like I was where I belonged. Restaurant work was nothing like the glamorized versions on television. My shifts were grueling, often 12 hours of non-stop movement in sweltering heat. I came home with burns, cuts, and aching feet. But I also came home fulfilled in a way that 3-hour marketing meetings had never provided. Chef Marcus Bennett was a notoriously demanding boss who reduced servers to tears and fired line cooks for minor infractions. But he was also brilliant, and I absorbed everything I could from him. "Your knife skills are garbage," he told me on my third day, demonstrating the proper technique for julienning carrots. Where others might have been offended, I was grateful. Each criticism was a chance to improve. After 6 months at Harvest Table, I had worked my way up from vegetable prep to managing the cold station. After a year, I was running the hot line during the busiest shifts. My savings had taken a hit, but my skills and confidence had grown exponentially. I spent the next 3 years working at 4 different restaurants, seeking to learn different cuisines and management styles. Each job taught me something crucial: inventory control, staff management, menu development, cost analysis. I was building not just culinary skills but the business acumen that would eventually serve me well. During this time, my relationship with my family grew increasingly strained. Holiday gatherings became exercises in tension, with my choices the unspoken elephant in the room. My parents had mostly moved from anger to resigned disappointment, introducing me to their friends with vague references to my work in the food industry rather than proudly stating I was a chef. My grandmother remained my staunchest supporter, though age had begun to limit her mobility. "Are you happy, Jessica?" she'd ask during our phone calls. "When I'm cooking?" "Absolutely," I'd answer truthfully. "Then you're on the right path," she'd say. Some people spend their whole lives doing what others expect and never find that feeling. By my 33rd birthday, I had worked in every position in a restaurant from dishwasher to executive sous chef. My savings had recovered and grown. I had developed a clear concept for my own place, a seasonal, locally sourced menu that honored my grandmother's belief that food should create memories. I had a business plan, potential supplier contacts, and a mental roster of talented industry people who might join my team. What I didn't have was my family's support. What I didn't have was enough money. And what I didn't have, despite years of proving myself in professional kitchens, was freedom from the nagging fear that perhaps they were right, that I was chasing an impossible dream that would end in failure. But as I blew out the candles on the small cupcake I'd bought myself, I made a wish and a promise. This would be the year I stopped waiting for permission or approval. This would be the year my restaurant became reality. The first time I saw the space, it was raining. Water leaked through the ceiling in 3 places, collecting in rusty buckets placed strategically across the stained concrete floor. The previous tenant, a sandwich shop that had lasted barely 6 months, had left behind broken equipment and a lingering smell of grease and failure. But standing in that dilapidated space on Carson Avenue, I saw only possibility. Tall windows stretched across the front, promising natural light throughout the day. The bones of the building were solid 1920s construction. The location, just outside downtown in an emerging arts district, offered lower rent with proximity to both business clients and the young professionals starting to populate the area. It needs a ton of work, the realtor warned, stepping around a puddle. Probably not what you're looking for. It's perfect, I said, already envisioning the transformation. The building owner, an elderly man named Walter who had inherited several properties in the area, seemed surprised when I expressed interest. Restaurant business is tough, he cautioned. Had 3 different food places in here over the last 5 years. Mine will be different, I assured him with more confidence than I felt. We negotiated a lease with favorable terms, lower rent for the first year in exchange for my handling renovations. With a handshake and signed papers, I had taken the first tangible step toward my dream. The next step was securing financing, which proved far more challenging. Despite my solid business plan, years of industry experience, and excellent credit, bank after bank declined my loan application. Restaurants are high-risk investments, one loan officer explained apologetically. Especially first-time owners. After the 5th rejection, I sat in my car and allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of tears before regrouping. If traditional financing wasn't an option, I'd find another way. I launched a crowdfunding campaign, reaching out to every contact I'd made in the industry and community over the years. To my surprise, former clients from my catering days contributed generously. Industry colleagues shared my campaign. Even Chef Marcus, who had never given me a compliment in the 2 years I worked for him, donated and shared my story with his substantial social media following. Anderson has actual talent, he wrote. And she works harder than anyone I know. The campaign raised nearly $30,000, nowhere near enough, but a significant start. For the remainder, I made the difficult decision to take out a second mortgage on my small condo. It was risky, putting my home and business on the line simultaneously, but I was all in. With funding secured, renovation began. To save money, I did much of the work myself, calling in favors from industry friends on their days off. We stripped away dropped ceilings to reveal original tin tiles. We sanded and refinished hardwood floors hidden under cheap vinyl. We rebuilt the bar using reclaimed wood from a demolished barn outside the city. Every decision balanced budget constraints with my vision. I scoured restaurant auctions for quality used equipment, sometimes driving hundreds of miles to inspect a commercial range or refrigeration unit. I found mismatched vintage chairs that we painted uniform colors, creating an eclectic but cohesive look for a fraction of the cost of new furniture. The kitchen became the heart of the renovation, designed for both function and connection to the dining room. I wanted guests to glimpse the care that went into their food, to feel part of the process. A large pass window would allow diners to see into the kitchen while providing the expediting station where I would personally inspect every dish before it reached a table. As the physical space took shape, so did my concept. I named the restaurant Nora's Table, in honor of my grandmother who had first nurtured my love of cooking. The menu would change seasonally, focusing on locally sourced ingredients transformed through both traditional and innovative techniques. It would be upscale but approachable, the kind of place that could host both special celebrations and casual Tuesday night dinners. Finding suppliers became my next focus. I spent weekends visiting farms within a 100-mile radius, building relationships with the people who would provide the foundation of my menu. There was Sam Miller's heritage pork operation, Beth and Tony's organic vegetable farm, the Lewis family's artisanal cheese production, and a dozen others who became not just suppliers but partners in my vision. "You're different from other chefs who've approached us," Beth told me as we walked through rows of heirloom tomatoes. "You actually care about how we grow things, not just what they cost. The story of your farm becomes part of the story of each dish," I explained. "I want guests to taste that connection." Hiring staff presented its own challenges. I couldn't afford to lure established talent with high salaries, so I looked for potential and passion instead. Maria, a recent culinary school graduate with raw talent and boundless enthusiasm, became my sous chef. Devin, who had worked his way up from dishwasher to line cook at one of my previous restaurants, joined as my reliable second. For front of house, I found Alex, a veteran server with a warm personality and encyclopedic wine knowledge who believed in my concept enough to leave a lucrative position at an established restaurant. They became the core of what I already thought of as my restaurant family, the people who believed in Nora's table before it even existed. The permit process nearly broke me. Each inspection seemed to reveal another costly requirement or necessary modification. The ventilation system needed upgrading. The dishwashing station required reconfiguration. The bathroom needed to be made more accessible. Each setback drained more from my dwindling reserves and pushed the opening date further back. My parents' warnings echoed in my mind during sleepless nights. My father had scoffed when I'd mentioned my plans during a tense phone call. "Restaurants fail every day," he'd said. "Even experienced owners with deep pockets go under in the first year." My mother had sighed deeply. "We just don't want to see you hurt, Jessica. Or homeless when this doesn't work out." My sister had been more blunt during our last family dinner, which had devolved into another debate about my choices. "It's like you're deliberately setting yourself up to fail," Megan had said. "And for what? So you can say you tried before coming back to a real job?" Only my brother Ryan had shown any softening in his position, offering to review my business plan as a professional courtesy. His suggestions had actually been helpful, though delivered with the clear subtext that he still expected the venture to fail. But with each challenge, I found a solution. When the upgraded ventilation system destroyed my budget, I found a restaurant equipment repair specialist who showed me how to refurbish the existing system for a quarter of the replacement cost. When the plumbing work revealed issues behind the walls, my small team and I worked through the night to bring everything up to code before the inspector returned. As opening day approached, the restaurant transformed from a construction site to the space I had envisioned all those years ago. Warm lighting illuminated the exposed brick walls. Custom shelving displayed jars of house-preserved seasonal produce. The open kitchen gleamed with well-maintained equipment. The bar showcased local spirits and carefully selected wines. The week before opening, we held a series of friends and family soft opening services to work out kinks in the kitchen and service. Industry colleagues, suppliers, and supporters from my crowdfunding campaign filled the tables, providing valuable feedback that we incorporated into final adjustments. On the eve of the grand opening, I stood alone in the completed space after everyone had gone home. Every surface had been polished, every detail attended to. The walk-in refrigerator was stocked with the finest ingredients I could source. The reservation book showed a promising number of bookings for our first official week. Tomorrow would be the culmination of a lifetime of passion, years of sacrifice, and months of backbreaking work. I had invited my entire family, parents, siblings, even aunts and uncles, to be my honored guests at the special family table I had reserved for them. Despite our differences, I wanted them to be part of this moment. I needed them to see that my dream wasn't just a fantasy but a tangible achievement. As I locked up that night, I allowed myself to feel something I'd been holding at bay throughout the entire process: hope. Not just hope that the restaurant would succeed financially, but hope that finally, seeing my vision realized, my family would understand. That they would be proud. Opening day dawned clear and crisp, perfect October weather that seemed like a good omen. I arrived at the restaurant at 5 a.m., hours before any staff were scheduled, just to savor the quiet of the space and mentally prepare for the day ahead. The morning passed in a whirlwind of final preparations. Produce deliveries arrived, each item inspected for quality before being accepted. Maria and I prepped sauces and components that would form the foundation of the evening's dishes. Devin meticulously organized the line for maximum efficiency. Alex trained the servers on the menu, having them taste each dish and accompanying wine pairing so they could speak about them with genuine enthusiasm. By 4 p.m., everything was ready. The tables were perfectly set, each detail in place. Fresh flowers from a local farm adorned each table in simple arrangements that complemented the restaurant's aesthetic. The special family table, a round 8-top in the best location with a view of both the open kitchen and the street, had received extra attention. I'd added a small handwritten card expressing my gratitude for their support throughout my journey, perhaps a bit aspirational given reality, but I wanted the evening to be a fresh start. At 4:30 p.m., I gathered the staff for our pre-service meeting. We reviewed the evening's specials and reservations, but mostly I wanted to thank them for believing in Nora's table. "Tonight isn't just the opening of a restaurant," I told them, fighting to keep my voice steady. "It's the beginning of something special we're creating together. Every person who walks through that door is walking into our home, and we have the privilege of creating an experience they'll remember." Their faces reflected my own mix of nervousness and excitement. We put our hands in the center of our circle for a rallying cheer of Nora's table, before taking our positions. At precisely 5 p.m., Alex unlocked the front door, and our first guests arrived, a middle-aged couple who had contributed to my crowdfunding campaign. I greeted them personally, thanking them for their support and for being our very first official customers. The early dinner service began smoothly. Each table filled according to reservations, with a few walk-ins we were able to accommodate at the bar. The kitchen found its rhythm, tickets flowing steadily without overwhelming us. The feedback was everything I had hoped for: appreciative murmurs, empty plates returning to the kitchen, compliments sent back to the chef. But as 6:30 p.m. approached, I found myself increasingly distracted, my eyes darting to the door whenever it opened. My family's reservation was for 7 p.m., and I had yet to receive any confirmation they were actually coming. I had texted them all that morning with a reminder and directions to the restaurant, but had received only a thumbs-up emoji from my brother Ryan. At 6:45 p.m., I sent another group text: "Your table is ready whenever you arrive. So excited to see you all." No response. By 7 p.m., the restaurant was filled with happy diners, all except the conspicuously empty family table. I kept cooking, kept expediting, kept smiling at guests who had no idea that with each passing minute, a knot in my stomach grew tighter. At 7:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from my sister Megan: "Sorry, got stuck at work. Big case. Probably can't make it. Congrats though." At 7:30 p.m., another text, this time from Ryan: "Kevin's got a fever. Abby doesn't want to bring the kids out. Sorry, maybe next weekend?" My mother finally texted at 7:45 p.m., "Your father's back is acting up. We're going to have to take a rain check, honey. I'm sure it's lovely." By 8 p.m., as the first seating was finishing their meals and the second wave of reservations arrived, I had to accept that no one from my family was coming. My father hadn't even bothered to make an excuse. The empty table stood as a stark reminder of their absence, visible to me from my position at the pass. I asked Alex to seat a waitlisted couple there, unable to bear looking at those empty chairs any longer. Despite the personal disappointment, I refused to let it affect service. Each dish that left my kitchen was perfect, each guest treated with genuine care. I threw myself into the work, focusing intently on every detail as if technical perfection could fill the emotional void. Midway through service, an unexpected guest arrived: Laurel Simmons, the food critic for the Cincinnati Herald. Though we hadn't known she'd be coming, her presence was immediately recognized by several staff members. The restaurant momentarily froze before I steadied everyone with a look. "We change nothing," I said firmly. "We cook and serve exactly as we have been. This is who we are every day, not just for critics." Laurel received the same warm welcome as every guest, was seated at a standard table, and experienced Nora's table as I intended all guests to experience it. I sent out a single complimentary amuse-bouche, the same one every table received, but otherwise treated her visit as unremarkable. By the time we served our last dessert at 10:30 p.m., Nora's table's grand opening could objectively be called a success. We had served 64 guests with minimal kitchen or service issues. The comments had been overwhelmingly positive. The till showed strong sales, including better-than-projected wine and cocktail revenue. As guests departed, many stopped to compliment the food and atmosphere personally. Several made reservations for return visits before leaving. Even Laurel Simmons had shaken my hand and thanked me for a memorable experience without revealing anything about her pending review. The staff and I cleaned and closed the restaurant with efficient teamwork, already developing the shorthand and rhythms that define great restaurant crews. We shared a toast with leftover champagne from the welcome flutes we'd served to guests. "To a perfect first night," Maria said, raising her glass. to many more," added Alex. Their faces showed the tired satisfaction of service professionals after a successful shift. They chatted about favorite moments from the evening, funny customer requests, and plans for small adjustments tomorrow. I smiled and participated in the conversation, playing the role of the proud and satisfied chef owner. No one needed to know about the family-shaped hole in my evening. This was a professional triumph regardless of personal disappointments. After everyone left, I completed the final lockup procedures, turning off the last lights and setting the alarm. Standing outside my restaurant, truly mine in every sense, I should have felt unmitigated joy. The dream I had sacrificed everything for had materialized exactly as I'd envisioned. But as I walked to my car in the now empty parking lot, the emotions I'd suppressed throughout service washed over me. My family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, hadn't bothered to show up on the most important night of my professional life. Not a single one. I made it inside my car before the tears came, sobbing against the steering wheel like the little girl who had once burnt a batch of cookies and been told by her father that she should stick to her homework. Some wounds, it seemed, never fully healed. I don't remember driving home that night. The roads were a blur through tears that wouldn't stop coming. My condo, always a sanctuary after long shifts, felt hollow and empty. I kicked off my chef clogs at the door and collapsed onto my sofa without even turning on the lights. The contrast was almost unbearable. Hours earlier, I had been in my element, cooking with precision and passion, receiving immediate validation for my work in the form of clean plates and compliments. Now I sat alone in darkness, the familiar voices of doubt creeping back in. Maybe they were right. Maybe this whole endeavor was doomed to fail. Maybe I had sacrificed relationships, security, and my family's approval for a dream that would ultimately collapse like so many restaurants before it. I allowed myself to spiral in a way I hadn't since the early days after quitting my marketing job. Every fear, every insecurity, every harsh word my family had ever said about my choices played on repeat in my mind. The successful opening night began to feel like a fluke, the positive reactions merely politeness from people who wanted to support the underdog. Around 3 a.m., exhausted but unable to sleep, I pulled out an old photo album. There I was at 10 years old, proudly displaying a birthday cake I'd made for my father. His face in the photo showed not joy but distracted tolerance, already flipping through mail in his hand while I beamed at him. There were dozens more images like this, moments where I sought approval and received indifference. Why had I spent my entire life seeking validation from people who had never truly seen me? The question hung in the air, unavoidable and demanding an answer. Dawn was breaking by the time I found it. I had spent 34 years trying to reconcile two incompatible truths. I desperately wanted my family's approval, and they were constitutionally unable to give it to me for the life I actually wanted to live. No amount of success would change their fundamental belief that cooking was beneath me, that a restaurant was a foolish risk, that I had thrown away my potential. The realization didn't immediately ease the pain, but it provided a strange clarity. This wasn't about the restaurant's success or failure. This was about letting go of a fantasy family that existed only in my mind, one that would someday see my passion and validate my choices. I finally fell asleep as morning light filled the apartment, emotionally drained but with a seed of resolution planted. When my alarm blared 3 hours later, I dragged myself to the shower with heavy limbs but a lighter heart. The restaurant was closed on Mondays, giving us one day to recover and prepare for the week ahead. I had planned to use the day for administrative tasks, but first, I needed coffee and perspective. I walked to my favorite local cafe, ordered the strongest brew they had, and opened my laptop. An email notification caught my attention. A Google alert I'd set up for mentions of Nora's table. With some trepidation, I clicked the link. It led to the Cincinnati Herald's website, where Laurel Simmons had already published her review. I held my breath as I began to read. Cincinnati's dining scene has a new star in Nora's Table, the debut restaurant from chef Jessica Anderson. In a city increasingly populated by restaurant groups and outside investors, Anderson's intensely personal vision stands out for its authenticity and clear point of view. I read on, hardly believing the glowing praise that followed. Laurel had highlighted dishes I was particularly proud of, noted the thoughtfulness of the wine pairings, and commended the service as attentive without hovering, knowledgeable without pretension. Her conclusion brought fresh tears, these of a different nature. Nora's table feels like the restaurant Cincinnati didn't know it needed, a place where technique and heart share equal billing, where local ingredients are elevated but never manipulated beyond recognition. Chef Anderson has created not just a restaurant but a love letter to Cincinnati and its bounty. This is destination dining that locals will want to keep as their own special secret, though I suspect that will be impossible once word spreads. I sat stunned, rereading the review multiple times to make sure I hadn't imagined it. As one of the city's most respected critics, Laurel's opinion carried significant weight. A review like this could make all the difference for a new restaurant. My phone began buzzing with text messages and calls from the staff, who had also seen the review. Their excitement was palpable, their pride in our collective achievement genuine. But there was nothing from my family. Not a text, not an email, not a voicemail. The review was being shared widely on social media, and still, silence. Strangely, I found I wasn't waiting for their reaction anymore. Their absence at opening night had been painful precisely because I had built it up as the moment they would finally see and acknowledge my success. Without that expectation, their silence lost much of its power. I spent the rest of the day responding to a flood of reservation requests that poured in following the review. By evening, we were fully booked for the next 3 weeks. I also fielded calls from local vendors asking to supply the restaurant, other chefs offering congratulations, and even a few investment groups interested in discussing expansion opportunities, which I politely declined. When I returned to the restaurant that evening to check on a few things, I found a small package leaning against the door. Inside was a handmade card from my grandmother, who lived in assisted living 2 states away and couldn't travel alone anymore. She had somehow arranged for a local bakery to deliver her favorite cookies along with her note. "I knew you would shine, Jessica," she had written in her shaky hand. "Never apologize for following your heart. I'm saving the newspaper article about your restaurant to show everyone here. All my love, Grandma Nora." It was the validation that actually mattered from the person who had seen and nurtured my passion from the beginning. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. I dreamed not of my family's approval but of the day ahead, the dishes I would create, the guests we would welcome. I woke with the realization that while opening night had been a success by most measures, the true test would be sustainability. Could we maintain quality? Would customers return? Could I build the loyal clientele needed for long-term success? These were the questions that mattered now, professional challenges rather than personal ones. It was both terrifying and liberating to focus on the restaurant itself rather than what it represented in my family narrative. As I drove to Nora's table that morning, I felt a shift in my perspective. I wasn't cooking to prove my family wrong anymore. I wasn't seeking their validation or trying to earn their respect through success. I was cooking because it was who I was, because it brought me joy, because it allowed me to create experiences that connected people to food and to each other. The restaurant was booked solid that night, and the night after, and the week after that. Each service brought new challenges and triumphs. We adjusted dish components based on feedback, streamlined service procedures, and continued to refine the experience. I found myself fully present in each moment rather than waiting for some future validation that might never come. My phone still showed no messages from my parents or siblings, but it was filled with texts from my growing restaurant family, Maria sending pictures of a spectacular mushroom foraging find, Devin sharing ideas for menu adjustments, Alex reporting on a regular customer's birthday celebration we had helped make special. These were my people now. This was my life, chosen deliberately and built with purpose. And for the first time, that felt entirely sufficient. 3 months after opening night, Nora's table had fallen into the controlled chaos that defines successful restaurants. Our reservation list remained consistently full. We had expanded from dinner only to include weekend brunch service. The menu had evolved through 2 seasonal changes, each bringing new opportunities to showcase the region's bounty. What surprised me most wasn't the professional success but the community that had formed around the restaurant. Our regular customers became familiar faces who trusted us enough to try whatever special we recommended. Many knew my staff by name and asked about their lives. Several regulars had standing reservations. Mr. and Mrs. Chen came every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m., always ordered the chef's tasting menu, and left handwritten notes of appreciation. Professor Williams dined alone every Friday, working through our entire wine list methodically while grading papers between courses. My staff had become more than employees. Maria had blossomed from a talented but hesitant sous chef to a confident kitchen leader who now developed specials that frequently outsold regular menu items. Devin had stepped up as headline cook, his reliability and calm under pressure making him indispensable during our busiest services. Alex had built a team of servers who shared his passion for hospitality, creating a front-of-house experience that matched the quality of the food. We celebrated birthdays together with after-hours meals. We covered for each other during personal emergencies. We debated menu changes and restaurant policies with the heated investment of people who truly cared about the outcome. One Tuesday in January, during our weekly staff meal before service, Maria made an announcement that brought me to tears. "I got accepted to that advanced pastry program in Chicago," she said, her face a mix of excitement and apprehension. "It's only 3 months, but I don't want to leave you guys hanging." Before I could respond, the rest of the staff erupted in congratulations. There were no guilt trips, no concerns about how we would manage without her. Only genuine happiness for her opportunity. "We'll figure it out," I assured her, hugging her tightly. "This is an amazing opportunity, and we'll be right here when you get back. Probably stealing all your new techniques." It struck me then how different this reaction was from what I had experienced with my family. Here was unconditional support, celebration of growth even when it created challenges, prioritizing a person's dreams over practical concerns. This realization carried into other areas of the restaurant's operations. Our relationships with suppliers evolved from transactional to collaborative. Sam Miller, who provided our pork, invited the entire kitchen staff to visit his farm and learn about his humane raising practices. Beth and Tony from the vegetable farm began growing specific varietals at our request, knowing we would feature them prominently on the menu. Even our customers became partners in our success. When a late winter storm knocked out power to the restaurant for 2 days, regular patrons volunteered their help. A retired electrician checked our systems once power returned. A local business owner offered refrigerated storage for our perishables. A group of regular Tuesday diners organized an impromptu support dinner once we reopened, filling the restaurant on what would normally have been our quietest night. My phone remained conspicuously silent when it came to my family, with the exception of occasional texts from my grandmother, now too frail to write cards but still my most enthusiastic supporter. I had stopped sending updates about the restaurant after the first month, tired of the silence that inevitably followed. As spring approached, Cincinnati Magazine included Nora's table in their annual Best Restaurants issue, highlighting our commitment to local sourcing and seasonal cooking. The feature included a full-page photo of me in the kitchen, looking focused but happy while plating a dish. The day after the magazine hit newsstands, I received a text from my brother Ryan. "Saw the magazine article. Restaurant looks nice. Megan mentioned maybe trying it sometime." It was the first acknowledgement from any immediate family member in nearly 4 months. Once, such a lukewarm message would have sent me into a tailspin of analysis and hope. Now I simply replied, "Thanks. Let me know if you want reservations," and returned to prepping for service. My emotional energy was focused elsewhere on planning our first major event, a special spring equinox dinner that would showcase the first harvests of the season. We had closed the restaurant for a private party the previous week, and the success of that event had sparked the idea of more themed experiences. The spring dinner sold out within hours of being announced to our email list. We planned a 5-course tasting menu with wine pairings, featuring ingredients from a dozen local producers. Each farmer or maker would be present to speak briefly about their contribution, creating a complete story of the meal from soil to plate. As the event approached, I found myself thinking of my grandmother, who had always emphasized the story behind each family recipe she taught me. "Food tastes better when you know who made it and why," she would say. This dinner would be the embodiment of that philosophy. The night of the event exceeded even my expectations. The restaurant hummed with conversation as guests connected with the people who had grown or crafted the components of each dish. Farmers who normally worked in isolation received direct appreciation from the people enjoying the fruits of their labor. The final course, a honey lavender panna cotta, featured honey from a local apiary whose owner nearly teared up when guests applauded her contribution. After the last guests departed, the staff and participating producers gathered for our own celebration. We pushed tables together in the dining room, opened bottles of wine that had been gifted by appreciative guests, and shared a meal of our own simple food prepared with care after a night of elaborate service. Looking around the table at these people who had become my chosen family, I felt a fullness that had nothing to do with food. Here was community in its truest sense, people connected by shared passion, mutual respect, and genuine care for one another's well-being. Later that week, a local business journal contacted me for an interview about Nora's table's impact on the neighborhood. Since our opening, 2 new businesses had launched nearby. A small pottery studio that now supplied some of our serving dishes and a specialty food shop featuring many of the same local producers we showcased on our menu. "Some people are calling this area the Nora district now," the reporter told me. "How does it feel to be an anchor for neighborhood revitalization?" The question caught me off guard. I had been so focused on the day-to-day operations and building our community within the restaurant that I hadn't fully recognized our impact on the broader neighborhood. The responsibility was both daunting and inspiring. As summer approached, we launched another innovation, Sunday suppers, a weekly family-style meal served at communal tables. The format was simpler than our regular service, with large platters designed for sharing and a more accessible price point. The goal was to create a space where people could connect not just with the food but with each other. The first Sunday supper coincided with Father's Day. I had considered closing the restaurant that day, knowing it might trigger complicated feelings, but decided that creating a celebration for others was better than dwelling in my own disappointment. The communal tables filled with families of all configurations, traditional nuclear families, multi-generational gatherings, chosen families of close friends, single parents with children. Each group gradually began to interact with neighboring tables, sharing stories and passing dishes back and forth. By dessert, the entire restaurant felt like one large family dinner. As I watched from the pass, a strange thought occurred to me. I had created the family meal I had always wanted but never experienced. Not through blood relation but through intentional community centered around the table. That night after closing, I called my grandmother, who now resided in a nursing home where her declining health could be properly managed. "Tell me about the restaurant, Jessie," she said, her voice weaker than even a month ago but still eager for details. I described the Sunday supper, the connections formed between strangers, the laughter that had filled the space. "That sounds like what food is supposed to do," she said softly. "Bring people together. Create a family even when blood doesn't." "I wish you could see it, Grandma," I said, the familiar ache of missing her physical presence washing over me. "I do see it, through your words," she replied. "And I couldn't be prouder of the family you've created for yourself." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment reflecting on her words. The family I had created for myself. Not the one I had been born into, with its rigid expectations and conditional approval, but one I had built deliberately around shared values and mutual support. As summer progressed, so did this sense of chosen family. We celebrated the restaurant's 6-month anniversary with a staff party at a local park, complete with games, grilled food, and heartfelt toasts. Maria returned from her pastry program in Chicago with new techniques she eagerly shared. We hired 2 new line cooks and a pastry assistant, expanding our kitchen family with careful attention to finding people who shared our values. The most unexpected development came in late summer when a local culinary school approached me about teaching a guest seminar. Standing before a classroom of aspiring chefs, sharing not just techniques but the hard-won lessons of perseverance and self-belief, I found yet another community that embraced me. "Chef Anderson," one student asked after class, how did you know you were on the right path when so many people told you it was a mistake? The question struck at the heart of my journey. Looking at the eager faces before me, I answered with the truth I had finally embraced fully. I stopped waiting for permission to live the life I wanted, I said. And I found people who celebrated that life rather than questioned it. Returning to the restaurant that evening, I found a small package waiting for me. Inside was a handmade quilt with a note from my grandmother's nursing home. She had passed peacefully in her sleep the night before, and had left instructions for this gift to be sent to me immediately. The quilt featured squares made from her old kitchen towels and aprons, the fabrics that had witnessed our earliest cooking lessons together. Grief washed over me in waves, but beneath it ran a current of deep gratitude. She had lived to see me find my place in the world, to create the restaurant that honored her legacy, to build the family that nourished my soul. And in her final act, she had wrapped me in the physical embodiment of our shared love of cooking and nurturing others. That night, I hung the quilt in the entrance to Nora's table, a reminder to every guest of the woman who had inspired not just the restaurant's name but its entire philosophy of food as connection. The staff, sensing my grief, rallied around me with quiet support, taking on extra tasks, checking in with gentle questions, giving space when needed. This, too, was family in its truest sense, present in joy and sorrow. 1 year to the day after Nora's table first opened its doors, I arrived before dawn to prepare. Not for service, we had decided to close the restaurant to regular customers for our anniversary, but for a very special private event. The past year had transformed not just the restaurant but me as well, in ways I could never have anticipated that opening night. The restaurant had not only survived but thrived beyond my projections. We had been featured in national food magazines, received a prestigious James Beard nomination for Best New Restaurant, and become a destination for food lovers throughout the Midwest. More importantly, we had built a community and network of relationships centered around the shared values of quality, authenticity, and connection. But today wasn't about professional achievements. Today was about honoring the journey and the people who had made it meaningful. I moved through the quiet kitchen, preparing components for dishes that told the story of our first year. There would be the maple brined pork chop that had been on our opening menu, now refined and perfected. The spring vegetable salad that had emerged from our collaborations with local farmers. The dessert Maria had created upon returning from her pastry program that had become an instant signature. Each dish represented a milestone, a relationship, a moment of growth in our collective story. By mid-morning, staff began arriving, not just current employees but everyone who had been part of our journey. Former line cooks who had moved on to other opportunities. The part-time server who had left to pursue her degree. The dishwasher who now managed his own food truck. They came bearing small gifts and large smiles, filling the restaurant with the comfortable chatter of people with shared history. Our suppliers arrived next, many bringing special ingredients just for today's celebration. Sam Miller brought a heritage breed pork roast he had been saving for a special occasion. Beth and Tony from the farm brought the first winter squash of the season, harvested early that morning. The local cheesemaker brought an aged will she had set aside months ago specifically for this day. By noon, the restaurant hummed with activity as everyone took on tasks preparing for our celebration. Professional boundaries dissolved as former servers chopped vegetables alongside current line cooks, farmers arranged flowers on tables, and wine distributors decanted special bottles they had contributed. At one point, I stepped back to observe this beautiful chaos, overwhelmed by the realization that all of this had grown from the seed of a dream that had once seemed impossible. A dream my family had dismissed but these people had nurtured alongside me. The thought of my family brought a familiar pang, but one now tempered by a year of perspective. I had sent them invitations to our anniversary celebration, more as a formality than with any real expectation. Their silence in response had been predictable, almost comforting in its consistency. But as I returned to the kitchen to check on the roast, Alex approached with an unusual expression. "There's someone here to see you," he said. "Says she's your grandmother." My heart stuttered. My grandmother had passed months ago. But as I wiped my hands and walked toward the dining room, I saw her, not my grandmother, but her sister, my great-aunt Dorothy, whom I hadn't seen in years. At 89, she had made the 3-hour drive with her grandson, my distant cousin Mark. "I promised Nora I'd come see your place," she said simply, opening her arms for a hug. "She was so proud of you." Tears sprung to my eyes as I embraced her, breathing in the faint scent of the same perfume my grandmother had worn. She had brought with her a small box containing my grandmother's favorite rolling pin and handwritten recipe cards. "She wanted you to have these," Dorothy explained. "Said they belonged in a real kitchen where people would appreciate them." We settled her at a special table with a perfect view of both the open kitchen and the quilt that now hung prominently on the wall. As the afternoon progressed, she watched the preparations with bright, interested eyes, occasionally calling me over to ask questions about techniques or ingredients. "You know," she said during one such conversation, "your grandmother was the rebel in our family too. Nobody thought she should open that bakery back in '63, but it was the happiest 20 years of her life." I had known about my grandmother's bakery, of course, but had never connected it to my own journey. The parallels suddenly seemed obvious: another woman following her passion despite family doubts, finding fulfillment in feeding others. "Did the family ever come around?" I asked, suddenly needing to know this piece of my heritage. Dorothy smiled sadly. "Some did, some didn't. But she stopped needing them to. She found her people and her customers, her employees, the other shop owners on her street." She patted my hand. "Just like you have." As guests began arriving for our official celebration at 4 p.m., the restaurant filled with the people who had become my chosen family. Regular customers who had dined with us since opening week. Fellow chefs from restaurants across the city. The reporter who had written our first review. The bank manager who had initially rejected my loan but had since become a regular brunch customer. I had planned to say a few words before the meal began, but as I looked around at the faces turned expectantly toward me, I found myself momentarily overwhelmed. This room contained the physical manifestation of the life I had built for myself, not perfect, not without struggle, but authentically mine. "A year ago today," I began, my voice steadier than I expected, "I stood in an empty restaurant waiting for validation that never came. I thought success would be measured by certain people sitting at a certain table." I gestured to the space around us, now filled with warmth and anticipation. "Instead, I found all of you. People who showed up not out of obligation but out of genuine connection. People who celebrated successes and helped through challenges. People who understood that a restaurant is more than a business, it's a community." As the meal progressed through its courses, each table became a microcosm of the larger community we had built. Farmers sat beside regular customers, explaining growing practices. Staff members shared stories of memorable services. My great-aunt regaled her tablemates with tales of my grandmother's bakery adventures. Midway through the main course, the front door opened, admitting a late arrival. I glanced up, then froze with a plate in midair. My brother Ryan stood awkwardly in the entryway, alone and clearly uncomfortable. Alex smoothly took the plate from my hands and guided me toward the door. Ryan shifted his weight from foot to foot, clutching a small gift bag. "I saw the invitation," he said. "Thought I should at least stop by." A year ago, I would have been overjoyed, desperate for this small acknowledgement. Now I felt a complex mix of emotions: a residual hurt, genuine surprise, cautious appreciation for the effort, and an unexpected realization of how much I had changed. "Thank you for coming," I said simply. "You're welcome to join us. There's plenty of food." He hesitated, then handed me the gift bag. "I can't stay long. But I wanted to give you this." Inside was a framed photo I had never seen before: me at about 6 years old, standing on a chair in my grandmother's kitchen, focusing intently on stirring something in a large bowl. My grandmother watched nearby, her expression one of unmistakable pride. "Found it in Mom's old albums," Ryan explained. "Thought it should be here." The gesture, small but significant, represented perhaps the first time any immediate family member had validated my path rather than questioned it. Not full acceptance, not wholehearted support, but a tentative acknowledgement of the connection between who I had always been and who I had become. Would you like to meet everyone? I asked, gesturing to the gathering. He glanced at the crowded restaurant, clearly intimidated by the prospect. Maybe another time. I just wanted to say congratulations. The place looks great. He left shortly after, having declined food but accepted a glass of champagne for a brief toast. His visit lasted less than 20 minutes but represented a small crack in the wall that had separated my two lives. As the celebration continued into the evening, I placed the childhood photo on the bar where everyone could see it. My past and present no longer needed to be separate entities. The through line of my life, my love of cooking, of feeding others, of creating connection through food, had remained constant even as relationships and circumstances changed around it. The evening concluded with a dessert that Maria had created specially for the occasion, a play on my grandmother's signature apple cake, reimagined with modern techniques but honoring the original flavors. As guests enjoyed this final course, conversations flowed freely throughout the space, new connections forming between people from different parts of our restaurant ecosystem. After the last guests departed and only staff remained for our own private after-party, we gathered around the bar for a final toast. I raised my glass to the team that had become my family. To finding where you belong, I said, and to the courage to stay there, even when it's difficult. Later that night, alone in the quiet restaurant, I sat at the table where I had once hoped my family would sit. The anniversary celebration had been perfect without them. Their absence no longer defined my experience or diminished my accomplishment. I placed my grandmother's rolling pin on the shelf behind the pass, where it would be visible during every service, a reminder of inherited passion rather than inherited doubt. The restaurant would open again tomorrow to regular service, beginning our second year with the confidence of the first behind us. The journey from that empty family table on opening night to today's full celebration had taught me lessons I never expected to learn. That belonging is something you create, not something you earn. That family can be chosen rather than only born into. That validation from those who truly see you is infinitely more valuable than approval from those who don't. Most importantly, I had learned that success isn't measured by who shows up, but by being true to yourself even when no one does. The relationships that matter most are the ones that form around shared values and mutual respect, not obligation or history alone. As I prepared to leave, I placed my hand on the quilt that now served as both decoration and talisman for the restaurant. My grandmother had known all along what had taken me years to discover, that cooking was never just about food. It was about creating space for connection, for nourishment that went beyond the physical, for building family wherever you found yourself. Nora's table had become exactly that, a table where people found not just excellent food but a sense of belonging. A place where the question wasn't who's missing, but rather who's here, present and engaged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. The restaurant industry remained as demanding as ever. But I no longer faced those challenges seeking external validation or attempting to prove my worth. I faced them knowing exactly who I was and surrounded by people who valued that person. As I turned out the lights and locked the door behind me, I felt a profound sense of peace. The restaurant that had once represented a desperate bid for approval had transformed into the physical embodiment of self-acceptance. Every service, every dish, every interaction was now an expression of authentic purpose rather than a plea for recognition. I had opened my dream restaurant and invited my family to the grand opening. No one showed up. And in that painful absence, I had discovered something infinitely more valuable than their approval. The freedom to create a life and a family that truly reflected who I was meant to be. What moment in your life taught you the most about what family truly means? Has there been a time when chosen family showed up for you in ways blood relations didn't? Share your story in the comments, and if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Remember, sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most unexpected places. Thank you for being part of my journey today.